Hello, I'm taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. Welcome to the next episode. The next game is Game & Watch Donkey Kong. Game & Watch Donkey Kong was the second game released in the Game & Watch multi-screen series, and, as you might have guessed, this game features the return of Donkey Kong himself, along with Mario and Pauline. That's right, this game predates Donkey Kong Jr. by less than a month, meaning this was the true second game to feature the daring plumber and his gorilla nemesis. Humorously, while the name Mario has been used in the flyers already for the arcade game, the manual for this game simply refers to him as the Rescuer. With the wild success of Donkey Kong in the arcades, it's no surprise that Nintendo thought it would be a good idea to bring these characters to the Game & Watch. This idea paid off too, as Game & Watch Donkey Kong was the best-selling Game & Watch unit ever, selling a whopping 8 million units. Along with bringing Nintendo's big new names to the Game & Watch world, this Game & Watch unit featured something else that had never been seen before. You see, this unit featured the very first D-pad ever seen in gaming, an invention that was attributed to Gunpei Yokoi himself. Yokoi truly was one of the great minds at Nintendo during this era, and it's clear just how much of a role he played in helping to kickstart Nintendo's ventures into the world of gaming. So, how does this one work? Similar to Donkey Kong, you're trying to make your way to the top of a construction site by moving Mario from point A to point B. Donkey Kong also drops barrels once again, and you must jump over them to avoid losing a life. The similarities stop there though, and ultimately this game actually feels pretty different from its arcade counterparts. The first of these differences is just how different the physics feel. Game & Watch games don't really allow for a more complicated movement engine, so instead of being able to walk around and jump anywhere you want, like the original Donkey Kong, each direction you push moves you to the next predetermined location. Jumping feels especially different here, as it will immediately place you in the spot above you and drop you down after a bit of time passes. You can't jump on every spot though, so you have to be careful when moving around to make sure that you don't get stuck with the barrel in front of you when you aren't able to jump up. This results in general with much less situations you can end up in compared to the original, and you pretty quickly learn what types of maneuvers are possible and which are not. It's also worth noting that the path to Donkey Kong is completely linear here, rather than the occasional branching paths like in the original. There's also an extra obstacle here. Girders are occasionally carried across the center of the stage. You have to avoid these when climbing up the second ladder, and you can also bonk your head if you try to jump over a barrel while the girder is above you. As the game got more hectic, I found this middle area to be one of the more difficult spots to get through, since the girders and the barrels move at a different pace. The final big change here is that you don't just win when you get to the top. To rescue Pauline, you must remove 4 different hooks attached to a beam that is keeping Donkey Kong's platform up. To do this, you must first activate a crane using a lever on the left, then run over and jump onto a hook when it is swinging to the far left. If you take too long, the crane will go back down and you have to go back and pull the lever again. On my first run here, I didn't realize you had to push the actual jump button to grab the hook, and I ran off to the right and tumbled into my doom. Once you dislodge one of the hooks, you are sent back to the bottom, and it's time to make the climb once again. Once you get the final hook dislodged, Donkey Kong's platform tumbles and he falls to his doom. Doing this will earn you a bunch of points. Speaking of, there are a few ways to earn points in this one. Every barrel you jump over gives you a point, dislodging a hook gives you 15 to 18 points, depending on which hook it is, and knocking down Donkey Kong gives you an extra 20 on top of the 18 you already earned for dislodging the hook. Once you rescue the lady, everything resets and it's time for you to make the climb again. Unlike the arcade Donkey Kong, there's just this one level in this one. One final thing of note with this game, the multi-screen isn't really used in any special way, but it does allow for a much larger and complex course, which works well for a game where the objective is to navigate to the end of a stage. This game's mechanics are way more complicated than pretty much anything in the previous Game & Watch games, and it took me a bit to get the hang of it. On my first real run in Game Mode A, after I finally learned how to get on the hook, I only managed to dislodge 3 hooks before losing my last life at 66 points. You've really got to be careful when waiting for the right moment to jump to the hook, as I noticed Donkey Kong was often puppy guarding the far right side while the crane was up. On my second run, I rescued Pauline twice and ended with 202 points. At first I wasn't really sure what to call the ending for this one. I could reach the life refresh at 300, like the other multi-screen games, or I could end it after rescuing Pauline at least once. Initially, I decided on the latter, so I ended Game Mode A here. Game Mode B was a lot trickier. In particular, I noticed that the girders seemed to swing by much more often. On my first run, I only managed to dislodge 3 of the hooks before getting a game over. It took me many tries to finally take out Donkey Kong in this mode. Eventually, I was finally able to take him down and ended the run at 179 points. Later on, I actually decided to come back to this one to get to 300 points in each mode and see the life refreshes too. Surprisingly, this actually didn't take me all that long. It took me a bit to get back in the swing of things, but I got to 300 points in Game Mode A on my third try. When I was starting to get close to 300, I decided to just play it safe and jump over a few barrels to earn the points I needed. Game Mode B went by even smoother, and I got to 300 points on my first try back, once again using the same safe strats near the end. With that, Game & Watch Donkey Kong was complete. On to the review. This one feels a lot more ambitious than the previous Game & Watch games. Rather than focusing on a single repetitive setup that gets harder over time, this one has a full-on stage that you have to traverse through. It's a pretty nice change of pace, although trying to mimic the platforming style of Donkey Kong doesn't really feel nearly as good in the Game & Watch format. Despite its best efforts, the biggest downside here is that it only supports one stage, so it ultimately isn't really able to avoid the repetitiveness found in a lot of these Game & Watch games. I gave the game a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it'll help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.